Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Clapper, I wanted to ask you about your parting thoughts on Russia and the threat posed by Russia. You and the Secretary of Homeland Security acknowledged about a month ago that Russia had been hacking in our political institutions and interfering with our election, and that this was coming from the highest levels of the Kremlin. What is your assessment of whether that activity is likely to continue into the next administration if President-elect Trump, if a rapprochement between he and Mr. Putin doesn't materialize? Would you anticipate that the Russians will hack and dump documents that might be damaging to a Trump administration? Would that be consistent with what you know of their playbook?
Thanks for the question, sir. I don't anticipate a significant change in Russian behavior. We gave considerable thought to diming out Russia with that statement. We waited until we felt we had sufficient basis for it, and we did, and both from a forensic and as well as other sources of intelligence that led us to that statement. It may have had the desired effect, since after that, after the issuance of the statement and the communication that I know took place between our government and the Russian government, it seemed to curtailed the cyber activity that the Russians were previously engaged in. The Russians have a very active and aggressive capability to conduct information operations, so-called hybrid warfare. That's been a long-standing practice of theirs going back to the Soviet era, and I anticipate that it will continue.
Director, I want to drill down a little further into your comment that the Russian activity curtailed after the issuance of the statement. The dumping of documents didn't end with the issuance of the statement. Are you implying by this that that we know whether the documents provided to either cutouts or WikiLeaks had all been provided prior to the statement that was issued? Or is it entirely possible that the dumping of documents continued after the statement, and what may have been avoided was a further escalation of the interference in the form of trying to monkey around on Election Day or thereafter?
I was referring to the cyber reconnaissance that we had observed. Many state entities had observed prior to the statement, and that sort of activity seemed to have curtailed. As far as the WikiLeaks connection, the evidence there is not as strong, and we don't have good insight into the sequencing of the releases or when the data may have been provided. We don't have as good insight into that.
And based on what the Russians have done in Europe and elsewhere, what would you anticipate they would do during the coming administration in terms of their hacking and dumping and active measures campaign in the United States? Director, I think your microphone is off again.
That's hard to say, Congressman Schiff. I can't say what they'll do, and I can't forecast what the impact of our new administration might have on Russian behavior. That's kind of speculative. I just don't know.
Let me ask you about what you can tell us about their intentions vis-a-vis the Minsk Accords and Ukraine. Do you see any intensification of Russian efforts to disrupt the Ukraine or destabilize the Ukraine government? Or do you see efforts in the opposite direction? Are Russian incentives aligned to tamping down the violence there, or dialing it up at this point?
I think for now they will sustain their presence in the Donbass. We continue to see firing incidents exchanged along the line of contact, and recently, since yet another reaffirmation of the ceasefire, the number of incidents per week has increased. I think both countries will probably engage in actions and counteractions to try to promote instability. And clearly, the Russians want to sustain influence in a traditional part of Greater Russia, which is Ukraine. And so I suspect that sort of pressure will continue. I don't see much prospect for a resolution or compliance with the Minsk Accords. I think we'll just continue this sort of semi-stalemate we're in.
In terms of Russian conduct in the war in Syria, obviously Putin and the Kremlin are aware that the incoming president wants to have a different relationship with Russia. How do you see that as influencing their policy in Syria? Is the Kremlin likely to conclude by that they have more or less a green light to continue the siege of Aleppo or the bombing of civilians? Do you ascribe any significance to the timing of their resumption of that campaign following the discussion with the president-elect?
I can't speculate on what impacts any discussions with the new administration would have, but I can tell you right now the Russians are sustaining their behavior. They are increasingly putting more pressure on oppositionists in Aleppo, indiscriminately bombing women, children, hospitals, this sort of thing. And that will continue. That is having a negative effect on the oppositionists in terms of morale and willingness to continue to fight. And of course, this plays to Assad's objective of achieving a military victory, and that is the position he's in. I think he's probably less interested in any form of negotiations.
Do you foresee any change in the increasing Russian belligerence vis-a-vis NATO countries, their provocative acts in the air and in the sea? Do you see any changes in that in light of a potentially different relationship between the president-elect and the Kremlin?
Well, no, I don't, at least right now. The Russians recently deployed their lone carrier and are conducting some ops off of that. They have sustained the presence of their artillery and the deployment of very advanced air defense systems. And so at least I think that what that indicates that clearly the Russians are there to stay. They want to maintain the presence and the base in Syria is their only base outside the former Soviet Union, a permanent base that they maintain, and I expect they're planning on expanding their presence at Tartus to support naval operations in the Eastern Med.
Let me ask one last question on Russia, sort of the 30,000-foot question, and that is one aspect of the Putin doctrine has been to enhance his own stature at home by provoking confrontation with the West, by framing for his people at home the United States as the Russian equivalent of the Great Satan. How will he square that with his comments or overtures to the president-elect? In other words, does the Kremlin need the American boogeyman to maintain popularity at home, and how will they deal with that conflict if there's a different relationship between the president-elect and the Kremlin?
Well, All I can say here is that clearly Putin has played to this spirit of nationalism, if you want to call it that, in Russia by appealing to the citizenry and I think somewhat as a distraction for, or at least offer compensation for the economic privations that the Russian population continues to suffer because of their the economic straits they're in and the continued contraction of their economy. And so he does exhort and appeal to the patriotic spirit of the Russian people and to conjure up his standing up to opponents in the West, notably the United States, and as a way of reaffirming in their minds Russian greatness.